Good afternoon, everyone, and you're very welcome to this Multiplier event for Power Relations in Higher Music Education, PRIhME. My name is Deborah Kelleher, and I am the chair of the steering committee of PRIhME and also president of the Association of European Conservatoires. So a little bit of information, firstly, about PRIhME and about this session. In 2018, we found that the world was changing because of the Me Too movement and very obvious instances of power abuse across the creative arts industry and indeed in higher music education. In the Association of European Conservatoires, we were noting this and felt, what is our response? And as we discussed it, we felt that it went far beyond the Me Too movement alone and issues of sexual harassment and gender. And actually, we started to consider that power imbalances or power abuses or inequity was built in higher music education, in the norms and traditions of higher music education itself. And at that point, we were very motivated to try to rebalance this, to understand what power itself means, and to work towards a community of learning and working in higher music education that is as safe and supportive a learning environment as we could make it. When we were starting to think, okay, we need to understand these norms and traditions and talk about them and find resolutions and recommendations for our sector, the very first challenge we had was a power issue itself. Because in the AEC, how we solve problems is usually to set up committees of experts. That in itself was going to be quite an inclusive top-down answer. So even in finding a way to understand power and power relations in our sector, we had to also find a way that was as democratic and as inclusive as possible. This is where we started to think about the Citizens' Assembly model. And a Citizens' Assembly is a form of participatory democracy that's worked really well in Ireland and the Netherlands in particular, dealing with potentially toxic issues, like in Ireland, marriage equality or abortion, where governments and experts might have failed to have a good conversation, but an assembly of 99 citizens plus a chair gathered together to look at issues, who were deliberately from different walks of life, have managed to have meaningful conversations that have resulted in changes in the legislation. So with that in mind, a group of 10 institutions led by the Royal Irish Academy of Music, involving colleagues who are all listed on the PRIhME website, put in a fund for Erasmus funding so that we might have 50 citizens of higher music education, students, faculty, administrators and leadership, who would meet and would discuss in a deliberately as egalitarian format as possible the challenges that we face in our sector. I'm delighted to see here today Gretchen Amussen, who was the chair of the 4 citizens' assemblies that we held around the issue of power relations. Each of the 4 assemblies had a different theme. And this afternoon's session actually goes through the 4 assemblies theme by theme. The PRIhME project had different committees organising it at different moments. The overall committee was the steering group, which I chaired, and it involved representatives of the 10 institutions across Europe who were the main partners. In addition to this, there was the Assembly Working Group, which was chaired by Esther Nass. And the Assembly Working Group planned the activities that would happen in each assembly and communicated with our 50 stakeholders. And finally, we had the editorial board, many of whom are with us today and who are in fact leading this session. The editorial board's role was to put together the expert papers which we commissioned and to commission those, to formulate a peer-reviewed publication which will come out at the end of the PRIhME project, so that we have documentation and records of what occurred over the course of this project, which commenced in August of 2020 and finishes at the end of this month. I want to extend my sincere thanks to everybody that was involved in the PRIhME project. This goes from our 50 brave stakeholders and our chair to the Assembly Working Group and the editorial board. I also want to thank those experts, some of whom are here today, who gave papers that were a firm foundation for the work that the stakeholders did. I hope very much that you enjoy hearing about the outcomes and the experiences that we had across these 4 stakeholder assemblies. For us, it is the end of a project, but we hope it is the beginning of more conversations where we can support all of our stakeholders to engage in communities of safe and supportive learning and working. Ashkan, before I move on to our first presenter, is there anything else in housekeeping that you'd like me to cover?
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to this last Multiplier. For those who have joined before Deborah introduced the housekeeping rules, so just again, maybe to remind that the event is being recorded, if you are okay with it, and that we may also take some screenshots. If you would not like your image to be in the image and to be screenshotted, you are welcome to switch off your image while still following the event. And please, if you do not speak at that moment, please mute yourself so we could hear the speakers better. And as Deborah already mentioned in the beginning, we will take questions in the chat, and we will address them either after each session or at the very end in the Q&A session, depending on the time. And please, for all those who also just joined, please write your name, surname, and the institution or organization you represent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to pass on to our first group and our first moderator, who will present on Assembly number 1.
Lucia, you're muted.
Lucia, the microphone.
Yes, now it's okay. Sorry. So, hello everybody, and thanks, Deborah, for your introduction. We all know how much passion you put into this project and how much effort, so that everything could go in the best way. And so thank you, Deborah, on behalf of all of us. The first session of this conference will be dedicated to the first assembly and to its results. We'll talk about it with our special guest, Anna Bull, and with Callum Jekyll, who is a student at the Royal Irish Academy of Music and who was one of the participants to the stakeholder assembly. The program expected participation of the Assembly Working Group, but unfortunately they cannot be here today. But nonetheless, we talk a bit about the exercises they were supposed to present today. Editorial Board, Assembly Working Group, Stakeholder Assembly, all these bodies cooperated in the project together with the fourth body, the Steering Committee. I'll try during this session to give you also an idea of the tasks that they carried out. And so, let's start. The first assembly took place in September 2021, but the project, PRIhME, had already started several months earlier, during which the foundations for all the work that was then carried out were laid. PRIhME has been an absolute novelty in our sector for the topic, but also for the methodology. And therefore, the first phase was very complex because on one hand, we had to better define the topic, which was mainly work of the editorial board. And on the other hand, it was necessary to learn how to manage the model of deliberative democracy that we had adopted. And this was instead mainly the task of the Assembly Working Group. The overarching question for the first assembly was, what do we understand power relations to mean in the context of the higher music education institutions? As editorial board, we started asking ourselves the same question. When we talk about power, interpersonal hierarchies immediately come to mind, such as the relationship between student and teacher, but there are also professional hierarchies, for example, between different artistic genres, or between instruments or repertoires. There are invisible practices, hidden taboos. On the basis of our reflection, we conceived a series of questions to help the reflection by the Assembly and the awareness raising of how power relations reveal themselves within the higher music education. Reflection, questions. Our third step was to select texts and videos and prepare an information brief to be made available to the participants as preparatory material before the Assembly. This is because the Assembly deliberative process includes 3 phases. The first one is the learning phase. Participants are supported in learning about the topic. Our contribution to this phase was to prepare an information brief. We did the same work for all the 4 assemblies, reflecting on the topic of the single assembly, defining questions, preparing an information brief. All the briefs are available on the website of the project. For the information brief for the first assembly, we asked Anna Bull to write the expert paper, which is the most important document in the brief, the one we asked everyone to read carefully. Anna Bull is a sociology and musician, and she currently works at York University. She has 2 primary research areas: class and gender inequalities in classical music education, and sexual harassment in higher education. We thought she would be the perfect person to introduce the Assembly to the topic, and she was. She also met the Assembly during their meeting and discussed her paper with them. Anna really was an impetus for the Assembly. Anna, the floor is yours.
Hello, and thank you, Lucia, for those very kind words. It was an honor and a privilege to write the expert paper on power relations and higher music education. And it's also an honor to be back here for your final event. And very many congratulations to the organizers and conveners of this wonderful program. So I will briefly say a little bit about the paper I wrote, and then I'll say a little bit about next steps and ways forward building on this work. And I will share my screen with some slides to help you. So just last month, abuses of power in higher music education hit the headlines in the UK. Classical music journalist Hattie Butterworth, wrote this piece for London's Evening Standard on one-to-one teaching in higher music education, particularly around classical music. And she focused on psychological abuse in classical music. And she is herself a graduate of conservatoires. And it was interesting that she was speaking to younger classical musicians who have recently graduated. And unfortunately, the accounts she reveals in this article, which I also contributed to, shows that this psychological abuse and bullying is still occurring. So the work that you and we are doing on addressing power relations is still very, very important. And in this article, she talked about the intensity of the space of higher music education as a breeding ground for inappropriate behaviour and relationships. And since this came out, I've also learned that the Musicians' Union in London has passed a resolution to create resources for students who have experienced bullying and psychological abuse and other forms of abuse. So this work continues. Now, of course, this is about classical music, and I know we have people here from different genres as well. But nevertheless, I think it's telling that 3 years on from the inaugural event, these issues are still hitting the headlines. So in the expert paper I wrote, I drew on material from my book, Class, Control and Classical Music, published 4 years ago now. And in one of the chapters, I also revealed accounts of bullying and power abuses in classical music. So one young man, Jonathan, in his first year at a conservatoire, described how he had a real bastard of a teacher who really broke him. He said, but I persevered. And then he said, I appreciated him breaking me down, that he needed to have that humility brought to him. And he goes on to say, whilst this did depress me, I persevered. And I think to understand power relations, we have to understand the complexity of this response from Jonathan, because this was mirrored across other accounts from young classical music students. They said that their teachers made them cry, humiliated them, and shouted at them, but that they were grateful for this behaviour, or they thought it was their fault, not the teacher's fault, because they were not good enough, they weren't working hard enough, they weren't mature enough. So for me, this shows something about the culture of classical music education in some places and perhaps quite widely. So this raises questions. Why did these students think this was normal? Why did the teachers think this was acceptable? And if these behaviours were seen as normal, would other forms of abuse also be normalised? So in my expert paper, I outlined the ways in which hierarchies of value in higher music education create a context that enables abuse to occur. So this is by creating a hierarchy of value of who is valued more than others. It's as simple as that. Within an institution or within a society. So these hierarchies draw on wider social inequalities and differences. We could call these the macro level. So for Jonathan, actually, he was from a lower middle class background, a less privileged background. And at conservatoire, many people were from much more privileged class backgrounds. So for him, his class background was a form of vulnerability that may have contributed to how he experienced the abuse or him being targeted for abuse. So that's one level of hierarchies of inequality. A second level happens within the institution itself, and hierarchies of value are created within institutions, what you can call the meso level. One example might be around genre of music, and in a lot of societies, the UK very much being the case, classical music is given higher status, is given more resources and more prestige than other genres of music. So that's both social and in institutions. And then, of course, there are interpersonal or individual differences, what we could call the micro level, which also create hierarchies of value. So this might be as simple as a pupil being labelled as talented by their teacher. And that labelling process gives them status and prestige, while another pupil is not given that status. So this is the context that the power relations that enables abuses of power and supports them. But I think to really understand power relations, we've got to remember that they can also be pleasurable. And I've got this picture of a choral conductor, which is not from my research, but some of the accounts of the pleasure of being controlled, the pleasure of being subjected to power and dominated, came from people in the choirs in my study, in the choir in my study. So power relations could be enjoyable, and they could also make people want to do their best and want to push themselves. So power relations are not necessarily repressive or negative. They can also be positive, or they can be experienced positively. So we have to be aware of how these relations are organized. Okay, this is the situation. We have these deeply entrenched power imbalances across genre, across social inequalities, across interpersonal differences that create a context that can enable abuse to occur, as well as other hierarchies. So what are some of the ways forward that we can use to combat these power relations? Some of my new work is on youth voice in instrumental music education. And again, it is focusing on classical music. So I would be very interested to hear from people in other genres whether this work is also relevant to your context. And this is from an article forthcoming in the Journal of the Royal Musical Association. And it's not out yet, but if you do want to read an advance copy, there's an advance copy on my blog. And the question that this work asks is, how can a youth voice be embedded within instrumental classical education? How can young people's voices be heard in their teaching and learning? And youth voice, or thinking about student voice, is a way to neutralize or combat or work against these hierarchical power relations. And I worked with definitions of youth voice that thought about how power relations are developed, how power relations create voices. So by this, I mean what it's possible to say, or whether it's not possible to speak. Those voices are created within these hierarchies, within these power relations. So if you ask young people or young musicians what they want, those voices are never neutral. They're always shaped by these wider power relations. And I draw on work from Diane Ray and Madeline Arnott, which talks about this sociology of pedagogic voice and the power relations that create voices. But when we're talking about music, we're not just talking about voice as in asking people what they think about their learning. We're also talking about people's musical voices. So I drew on work from Kathy Davis and Gary Spruce, which talks about musical voice, as well as dialogic voice. So musical voice that's always created in dialogue with other people. So this shows that voice, this is a very quick tour, I'm afraid, but voice is not a simple something that you can just listen to. voices are created within these wider contexts, and musical voices, musical expression is also created within this wider context of power relations. So I simplified these definitions to talk about two types of voice in music education. Learner voice, so the extent to which learners have a say in their own teaching and learning, and musical voice, so that's young people's musical expressive capabilities. And both of these are shaped by power relations. So I worked with some young people, younger 11 to 16-year-olds in Lewisham in South London, and we talked about times when they had or hadn't had a voice in their music education and in their instrumental education. And actually I was saddened to hear that while there were some instances that they had a voice, for the most part, they understood that they hadn't had a voice. So one young woman said, my violin teacher normally chooses the pieces I'm going to play and chooses if I'm going to skip a grade, so doing grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. The time I had a choice, a decision, was deciding to play the violin for the first time. So her decision-making, her voice was very limited here. And in terms of musical voice, a different young person said, I went to my teacher, I wanted to add other aspects to the piece I was playing. But when I tried it out, my teacher said it wasn't how to play it. So you can see how musical voice, actually young people were pushing back against the power relations and the hierarchies, and they were finding ways to use their voice, but these were not being listened to within these power relations. So I won't say more about this project, but you can read the paper if you're interested, other than just to say that I found that outside of their instrumental lessons, young people were finding ways of exploring their musical voices and playing the music they wanted to play. But within their lessons, they were not usually getting the chance to use their learner voice or their musical voice. But I found that taking youth voice seriously in classical music, because of the genre conventions, would actually mean challenging these genre conventions. So when young people say, I want to play this differently, I want to add other aspects to this piece, teachers need to be open to doing things differently against the genre conventions. So I think that's kind of one direction that I've been thinking over recent years about how to create an environment where power relations do not sort of shape every aspect of young people's education experience. And just to finish, there's a couple of other pieces of work that you might be interested in that have come out recently. For those of you who are in classical music, I've edited a book with Christina Scharf and Lada Nushin called Voices for Change in the Classical Music Profession. And this has got academic voices as well as interviews with and contributions by industry experts on changes that are ongoing. So if you want examples and inspiration, I think it's quite an inspiring text. And then secondly, we with the EDI, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion in Music Studies Network in the UK, last year I led on this report, Slow Train Coming, which is about inequalities in music higher education in the UK. And we're organising a conference on the 24th of November, which will be online and at the University of Southampton. So if you're interested to hear more, please do join the email list on the contact details there. So I hope that there are some ideas in these publications or in this talk that will inspire you to think of new ways to experiment with changing power relations in music higher education. Thank you.
You are unmuted, Lucia.
Okay, sorry again. So thanks, Anna. And once again, you managed to hit the mark and tell us something that takes us further in our election on power relations. And thanks also for underlying the positive aspect of power. And we will talk a bit about that later. So I mentioned it earlier, the three phases of the assembly deliberative process. The first is the learning phase. The second one is the deliberative phase, focused on discussion. The third one is the decision-making phase that leads to specific recommendations or decisions. We've asked Colm Jekyll to share with the audience the recommendations that the assembly formulated at the end of the first assembly. Colm is a singer and a choral conductor, but also a passionate music educator. He also founded the Wild Chamber Choir, and he has been elected as conductor of the Trinity Singers for the next season. So Colm, the floor is yours. And you could also tell us something about your personal experience within the project.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be here speaking with you today. We had such a great 3 years with each other. It started off online, of course, because we started our project during COVID. But then for the third and fourth assemblies, we met in San Sebastian in Spain and Rome in Italy. And we, for example, in the first assembly on power relations, that I'll read out the resolutions for you now, we discussed Anna Bull's paper, and it was such an interesting discussion. We were talking to everyone all around Europe that were participating in this project, and particularly about that point that she made earlier in her presentation about the case study of the young boy named Jonathan. So Jonathan was studying with a professor, and he really had quite a negative experiencing depression, but felt that this was good for him and that it was the thing that made him a good musician in the end. And it was so interesting to speak to so many people in different kinds of conservatories and institutions all around Europe. And we all more or less had pretty much a similar experience. And I'm sure there are many people here today in this event that have had more or less the same experience also, which is very unfortunate. But I'm so glad that we're all here today to address that and speak about that. So we have some recommendations here. There are 5 recommendations here that we came to a conclusion on from the first assembly. There were many more in the actual assembly itself. There were many more recommendations that we came up with, but we wanted to narrow these down to about 5 succinct recommendations, just to make them as impactful as possible. So the first assembly recommendation is: we strongly recommend higher music education institutions to create networks of care to provide students, teachers, and staff with support for their physical and mental well-being. So throughout all the assemblies, we were always focusing on the 3 branches of who was being addressed. So that was students, teachers, and staff. So of course, I might have a bit of more of view from the student standpoint, as I'm still a student. But we wanted to put an emphasis on making sure that there is support available for everyone involved in the conservatory or the institution. So for students, this could be student unions, student support groups, someone that they can discuss with, someone that they can air out their grievances with. In our institution, in the Royal Irish Academy of Music, we have liaison officers. So we have a number of liaison officers in every faculty that people can speak to on a more informal basis. So this means that if someone has any kind of issue or problem, whether it's personal or it's academic, they can go to someone maybe in their faculty or someone that they know, which can be either a teacher, an admin staff, or a fellow student, in an informal way, just to kind of have a chat, let them know what's going on in their life, and maybe seek some solutions from there. Maybe this person has some advice that they can give to this student or staff member, whatever it is. Usually these people will have also received a small amount of training as well to deal with this. So also in our institution is a number of supports for everyone involved through psychotherapy. So we have two branches of psychotherapy in the Royal Irish Academy of Music that people can avail of. One is an external institution that's also in Dublin that people can go to for up to three free sessions a year if they wish. And then if they really need, they can maybe avail of more if that's possible. But then also we have an internal psychologist who is also a vocal teacher. She's also on the vocal faculty, and she's available for also up to 3 sessions per year for students if they want to avail of psychotherapy. It's a very interesting concept to have an internal teacher being able to deliver this kind of service, because Virginia is the person, Virginia Kerr is the vocal tutor who is the therapist in our institution. She really is able to understand the nuances of maybe what you're going through as a musician or as a music student. She's been there herself, but she's also a licensed therapist, so she can really help you in a number of ways. We also wanted to mention that with this, we understand that not every institution might have the financial possibility to employ internal or external therapists or counselors of some kind, or any kind of care specialist that they need, but maybe that they can avail of something externally that's maybe like a non-governmental organization, an NGO or a charity that can offer subsidized or free care to whoever needs it, whether that's teacher, student, or staff. The second recommendation is that we urge institutions to explore ways of fostering dialogue by creating safer spaces where issues related to power relations can be discussed openly without fear or prejudice. Great. So we have them up on the screen as well, so you can read it as well. So the first point I want to make is we call it a safer space rather than safe space. This is because, for example, if a student is, going to someone about an issue that they have, it's not necessarily a safe space, because they're probably experiencing a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. Maybe they've gone through a traumatic experience or something. So it's not really a safe space, but at least hopefully we can create safer spaces for these people in our institutions. Can someone access a safe space or safer space in your institution? Is that possible for them? Is there either a physical space for them like that? Or can they go to someone within the institution or a group of people within the institution if they need to go to someone? Things like human resources or even the complaints procedure. How visible is your complaints procedure to people in your institution? Is it visible on your website? Do people know about this? During initiation, maybe when people come into your institution, are they made aware that there's a complaints procedure? And also, is the complaints procedure clear enough for people? Does it entail what exactly will happen if they make a complaint, how long it will take for their complaint to be received and dealt with, and also the product? So what will come out of them making a complaint? Is that clear for people? It's really important that that is clear for people. We need to create these safer spaces because sometimes in our institutions, there are times when it's not a safe space. We have this unique one-on-one scenario in conservatories and higher music education institutions where this kind of doesn't really exist anywhere else, where a student takes a lesson with a teacher for an hour at least a week, every week for the entire academic year, and it's one-on-one. And if things are going well between the student and teacher, that's amazing and that's fabulous and it can really do wonders for the student. But if things aren't going well, things can go so wrong. And it's so important to be able to have somewhere for students and teachers to go if things aren't going well, because so much power is given to that teacher during that 1 hour a week. And during that entire student's experience, if they're studying with them for 3 or 4 years, so much power can be given to that one tutor. So it's really important that that student is able to avail of a safer space and someone trusted and a complaints procedure that is appropriate for their situation if things do go wrong. We have a third recommendation here. So we propose the creation of a glossary related to power relations and empowerment and annual workshop sessions to address the issue. So vocabulary and a glossary and making sure that people have the words to express themselves can be such a powerful thing for people. On the AEC website, the Association of European Conservatoires website, there is a glossary that we made in our assemblies that's available to everyone. And I believe there's a number of translations as well. Hopefully that'll be in your language as well. So you can use that, or you can make your own as well. It's really important to empower people so that they, when they do make a complaint, or if they need to make a complaint, they have the vocabulary and the words that are needed to make that complaint and to understand what's going on with themselves, how to speak up for themselves, and then report it if there's any issues. Such clarity leads to improved communication in defining different types of power, because they need to understand the power relations that is happening in their classes. The process of building a shared language also addresses power imbalance itself. The fourth recommendation is we urge institutions to engage more conversations on the topic of power relations, for example, through the development of specific learning modules. We have had so many conversations in this PRIhME project that has just been amazing and very, very, very empowering. How I feel about power relations in our institutions before this project and after this project has changed so much. I feel so much more comfortable speaking about this, not only to my colleagues who are also in this project, but also to my colleagues here in the Royal Irish Academy of Music and in other institutions in Dublin and Ireland, and also people from all around Europe that I meet during the year. It's so important to have these conversations, and when we speak about these things, it becomes less of a taboo, and that's what we're trying to do here with this whole project, is erase this taboo that we can't speak about negative power relations, that we should be speaking more about positive power relations, but also addressing the negative power relations. This results in less tense conversations when difficult or controversial issues are tackled. So if we actually talk about this from day one with young students who are coming in at 16, 17, 18 years old, and we talk about this and make it less taboo, they will actually have or be empowered and have the language to go and report this if there is going to be an issue during their studies, okay? Then the fifth and final recommendation is we urge institutions to empower students, teachers, and administrative staff through implementation of obligatory workshops and training to understand and recognize positive and negative aspects of power relations. So these negative aspects can include power abuse, harassment, and simply not listening. Then positive aspects can include recognizing one's power and even the positive power that a teacher can have to really empower a young student that's coming into the conservatory, you know, turn them into a real artist and see how well they're going to do in life as an artist. We recommended that there would be annual workshops, hopefully, and that everybody can engage with these workshops on a regular basis, that they can be reminded if they're returning back to the conservatory, or if they're new to the conservatory or the institution, that they'll learn for the first time what all these terms mean, what power relations is, how power relations works in the institution that they're about to enter. Taking in mind that young people 16, 17, 18 years old can be so vulnerable and so easily influenced, that we want to empower these young artists and these young musicians as much as we can. And having a workshop at the start of the year before they begin their studies about power relations and letting them know that certain behaviors aren't right, that they can report them, that they will be listened to if they do report them, if they do make a complaint, can make so much of a difference to young artists beginning their studies. We also mentioned about teacher training. So training for teachers, because a lot of the time in European conservatories, we have a lot of teachers that come from excellent performance backgrounds, and they really, really have a superb performance CV where they played in orchestras, they've toured all around Europe and the world, and it's fabulous. But they don't always have a lot of pedagogical training, sometimes almost zero pedagogical training, which I've seen personally. So it's really important to be able to train these people internally before they begin teaching, before they begin working with us, to let also them know that certain behaviors are not acceptable, that as an institution you have certain values and you want all of your admin staff, all of your teachers to work to a certain level and also share those values as a community within that academic institution. And that, you know, you can't behave in a certain way or whatever is appropriate for your institution. But also it's just letting them know about power relations as well. I think that's me done now, but before I finish, I just want to thank everyone who came today. It was such a pleasure to be part of the PRIhME project and also a pleasure to be asked to speak here today. I hope that was clear enough for everyone, and I hope that was interesting and you learned from it. And I hope you can also continue this conversation in your own institutions, in your own countries. I was looking through the chat at the beginning of the session here and seeing how many people there were from so many different countries all over Europe. And I was so happy to see that maybe you can all take something from this, go home to your own cities and institutions and start this conversation in those institutions. And of course, you can do what I do, is where start the conversation with one person, and when that ends, turn to the next person, start it again and again and again and again and again. It's the only way we're really going to address this issue. It's a huge issue in conservatories all around Europe. And I hope we can all tackle this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Callum. We can only give you a virtual applause, big applause. And we really hope that as many institutions as possible will implement the PRIhME recommendations, because they represent the synthesis of a very heartful work. I told you before that Anna Wood's contribution to the reflection of the assembly was really strong. But there was another significant boost. It was a video by Robert Chambers. Power is most commonly understood as a form of authority, control, or domination. This is what we call power over. When we talk about power to, power with, and power within, we move beyond this understanding of power. These expressions of positive power are reminders that power can be used positively as well as negatively. These 4 types of power are discussed by Robert Chambers in this video, but what makes special his reflection is that he adds a 5th type of power, the power to empower. Unfortunately, we do not have the time to watch this video, but I suggest you strongly to watch it. Robert Chambers, Power, the Elephant in the Room. So the few minutes that I still have, well, I'd like to dedicate these few minutes to show you the website of the project, because I think it's really interesting. We already quoted it during the first part of this session. So I will share the screen now. Okay. The PRIhME website is hosted by the AC website. So if you can enter the AC website, and you will find here the website. This is the home page. On the left, you find the menu. So as you can see, you can find here the final recommendations by the 4 assemblies and a narrative for each of them. Power Relations Toolkit. It's a sort of roadmap which has been designed by the Assembly Working Group as a help to improve power relations in our institutions. And it also includes some of the questions which were conceived by the editorial board during the preparation phase. Then we have the glossary Colm was talking about a few minutes ago. Glossary of terms related to gender and power relations. A glossary was one of the first needs expressed by the stakeholder assembly because it's important to know the exact meaning of words and how to use them properly. Exercises. In this section, you will find the exercises that have been designed by the Assembly Working Group and used during the 4 assemblies. That can be used within our institutions, in classroom, at meetings, during events, because they can help create or increase attention on these topics. Then we have the briefs we talked about before for each of the assembly. And you can find here also some inspiration about power and power relations. Here, you can find a description of what a deliberative democracy is and how it has been implemented in our stakeholder assembly. And then you find more information about the chair and the project itself. There is one more output which is still missing in the website, but it will be posted soon. It's an academic publication by the editorial board, which will be also published in hard copy in a few months. So if you are interested in power and power relations within our sector, if you want to improve your institutions, if you want to create a healthier environment, in these pages, you'll find many ideas and suggestions on how to proceed. And now it's time, just a moment, because okay. Now it's time to pass to the second session of the conference, focused on the second assembly. So Christa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Christa Brüstle. I'm a musicologist and head of the Center of Gender Studies and Diversity at the University of Music and Performing Arts in Graz in Austria. And I'm also a member of the editorial board of PRIhME. Well, as we already heard, an important aspect of the discussions about power relations in higher music education is the entire field of gender relations in the past and present, including the aspects of sexual orientation. These are power-related socio-cultural topics in general, what we all know, but also areas of very individual and personal experiences, which are also very strongly related to power relations, also to exclusion and discrimination, as well as to abuse of power, even violence, particularly in the private sphere, as we know from many feminicides in the last years. And therefore, an institution such as a university or a music academy with studies in Western musical art and jazz and folk and popular music, etc., is a central space for action with regard to these aspects. And this space can have positive and negative connotations for students in this respect, as we heard already. For teachers with authority, this space was usually a central and a protected space. It was a protected space always for teachers. Even if the teachers behave incorrect, rude, or belong to perpetrators. Students, on the other hand, have long been exposed to special power structures in this area, which have only been critically discussed for a few years now. I can only mention the Me Too movement or some cases of abuse of power at music academies that have become public in recent years. It is not only the behavior of authorities, professors, teachers, and famous artists that is, so to say, frightening, but it is also a problem that the educational institutions have taken a very long time and only now really reacting to the fact that abuse of power is being prevented and sanctionized. And it's also problematic that many students and musicians have found the condescending to discriminatory behavior of authority figures almost normal, or have seen no way to defend themselves against these toxic institutional structures. I would like to conclude my short introduction here, although I would be able to address, as you might understand, many more aspects, and now briefly introduce our speakers. In contrast to the program online, we would like to begin in this section with the presentation by Orne Sullivan. She's a student of voice at the Royal Irish Academy of Music, and she reports, as before, on the discussions and recommendations that have emerged from the second stakeholder assembly, which had been dedicated to understanding gender and sexual orientation and its impact on higher music education, and took place in February 2022. And I would also like to introduce the second speaker, and after my introduction, the two presentations will follow. The second speaker in this section is our guest, Séverine Cappiello. She is the head of Storm Production, which produces the Jazz à la Petite France Festival in Strasbourg, as well as the Women's Musical Season. She's a graduate of the Institute for Political Studies, Paris, and holds a postgraduate diploma in International Artistic Cooperation from PRIhME. She has been producing live shows for the past 20 years, from La Friche Belle de Mai in Marseille to the Percussion de Strasbourg, from contemporary music to jazz, improvised and creative music. And she's also the co-founder of the association HFX Grand Est, dealing with gender and genre equality in music. And it's also important to mention that she organized European professional meetings for gender equality in the music sector in Strasbourg this year in July, with hundreds of participants. Therefore, I'm sure that Séverine Cappiello has a great deal to contribute to our topic. And now we are looking forward to these two presentations, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Anya Sullivan, and I'm a student going into my final year at the Royal Irish Academy of Music in Dublin. And today I will be announcing the recommendations we came up with after our second assembly, which took part online. And I also, just like Callum, would like to say thank you so much for everyone involved in this amazing project. you have definitely opened up my eyes. There was a lot of things I had on my mind, and it was so nice to be part of this assembly where students were really heard as well, because I feel like that has been something in the past, at least within institutions, that doesn't usually happen, but in this space we were all really seen as equal and just as important as everyone else's voice. So I'd like to say thank you for that. And secondly, a warning, I am visually impaired, so my iPad will be very close to my face as I read out the recommendations and talk a little bit about what happened during the assemblies and why we came up with these recommendations. So I'll start off with our first one. So in this assembly about gender and sexual orientation, our first recommendation was, we urge higher music education institutions to strive for gender balance in recruitment of all teachers, staff, and students. This is very important. As we all know, there are certain jobs or certain instruments that carry a certain gender more predominantly than others, and we urge that institutions try and bring a balance to this. But obviously, this doesn't happen overnight. We can't just say, okay, we take 50% of male students, 50% of female students, or other sexual or other people with different sexual orientations. But we want to at least bring the awareness in that we should strive for a more balanced work environment, study environment. And this goes across all the different boards, teaching staff, students, and also faculty members. And we just want to ensure that there isn't a bias that is constant. In the second recommendation, we urge higher music education institutions to raise awareness of issues related to gender and sexual discrimination through ongoing mandatory workshops and training for students, teachers, and staff. These should include appropriate language and behaviours, information regarding institutional policies and support systems relative to discrimination or harassment, and advice for teachers. This was a very big topic in the assemblies because, a lot of us have dealt with either friends who are of a different sexual orientation that have been discriminated, or where teaching staff use the wrong vocabulary. And after speaking to some of the students in my college or with some of the teaching staff during one of our head of department meetings, I can't remember what the meeting was called, it was all the heads of faculty, and an issue arose where it wasn't necessarily that people were meaning to be discriminatory, but they didn't know the correct language. They didn't know how to proceed. We had a student that was transgender and had sent out an email to all the teaching staff that they had to deal with, and they would reply back with their old name saying, "Thank you, so-and-so." And it just kind of, they knew they'd tried, but at the same time, it just wasn't right when it had already been raised. And these are the kinds of issues that came up in the assembly. And it's obviously quite hurtful for people who are already very anxious about being open and sharing their sexuality with others, because of the fear of discrimination or harassment, which tend to come with this. But we really recommend that the correct workshops are being given to all teaching staff and students. In the Royal Irish Academy of Music, we have implemented a LGBTQ awareness workshop during the orientation week for all students. And as I'm aware of, there also is similar workshop for the teaching staff and faculty, just to make sure that there's an external person coming in and informing us on the correct language and just making us aware of how to be kind and respectful to each other. Sorry. And we recommend that all these workshops are mandatory. This is important because people who do harass and are disrespectful will ignore these workshops, but hopefully by making them mandatory, they can become more aware and more kind themselves. So in our third recommendation, we urge higher music education institutes to create safe, inclusive, and equitable teaching and learning environments through the development of a toolbox, including regularly updated and clear policies regarding sexual orientation, harassment, or discrimination. We further recommend the creation of safe spaces in which students, teachers, and personnel can confide in trusted outside experts. So what does this mean? Of course, we need policies, but there are different kinds, and we need to ensure that we know how to set them up, because often we find that the people who are in power to make these policies might not necessarily know what the life of either the student or staff member is like, what they are experiencing. So it is vital that we bring in an external expert who can help write these policies so that the colleges or conservatoires can adopt these. And we also recommended that there are both soft and hard policies. So with the soft policy, it can just be a glossary explaining all the language about gender appropriate lingo and the different classroom training material that we can use in everyday life. And then for the harder policies, these are the procedures on how to file a complaint or raise an issue of either discrimination or harassment. And then what the consequences are, where do these steps go to? So this came up a lot because obviously a lot of students, staff members and faculty might have issues with a certain situation within their institution and wouldn't necessarily know what the next step to do is. And hopefully by implementing these policies and making them readily available, people will be able to know what to do and know that they are not going to be unheard. Which leads me into our fourth recommendation. We recommend higher music education institutions develop comprehensive policies and procedures relative to gender discrimination in all its forms. Students, staff, and teachers should be made aware of their rights and responsibilities, as well as procedures by which they can register complaints regarding gender discrimination or harassment in any form. So when we were in these assemblies and we spoke about this particular topic, some of our institutions already had these kinds of guidelines or policies already within their constitutions. But we were quite saddened to hear that this wasn't the case in all of the different conservatoires involved. Sorry. We really want to urge that there's a need for an internal anonymous system to acknowledge and to acknowledge harassment and solve issues that students or staff have been faced with in the institution. So a lot of this is quite repetitive, but they all link into different aspects of how harassment can happen in the institutions. But it is just so important that we really ensure that everyone knows about these policies. And we all know that conservatoires are small, so if the word comes out that someone feels like they can't speak up, and then new students are thinking about going to college, or new staff members are thinking of applying to these conservatoires, and then they hear that there are these issues but nothing is happening, then where does that leave us in years to come? So if we face the problems now and try and make it better, hopefully that will ensure a brighter future and a more equal and safe work and study environment for all involved. And lastly, we have our 5th recommendation. We urge higher music education institutions to make widely visible information and institutional support systems regarding gender and sexual orientation, discrimination, or harassment. This can be done digitally through posters, buzzwords, photos, or of relevant support personnel, or by providing contact details of people who can help. So we'll take that apart a little bit. So basically we're saying making sure that information is easily accessible, easy to understand, and obtainable as well. So by having posters out, making awareness out in the student common rooms, out in the hallways, in the staff room, we can just raise the awareness in general. And then there needs to be a specific reporting structure, because it's important to know who to go to and what they can actually provide for you, how they can help you. And then we also recommend that this person may be a mediator or external trust person, because obviously we, specifically in my case as a student, I would feel quite anxious about going to one of the staff members, because then it's not really necessarily anonymous and maybe it'll backlash on me. And I can only assume that most people would feel that way when they have to raise an issue internally that might affect people they really like, or that they never thought would be involved in the case of harassment. So we need to have these toolkits that really outline these guidelines on what to do and who can help and who what can be done for these situations. So that's kind of it for me. I'm sorry it's a bit jumbled up, but I really took so much away from these assemblies. I met so many great people, and we were all so willing to make a better change within our institutions, and hopefully for other institutions who are kind enough and aware enough and open enough to listen to us today and just take in all the information that we are providing. So thank you very much for everyone for listening. And I hope you were able to understand my Irish accent as well. And yeah, thank you very much to everyone involved, and thank you to all the organisers of PRIhME for creating such a beautiful environment to work with.
Thank you very much, Anne, for this wonderful presentation. We had a meeting 2 days ago, and Séverine Capiello told us that she would very much like to react also to these recommendations and to your presentation. So we are very curious now to hear Séverine Capiello's presentation.
Thank you very much to the whole PRIhME organization and AEC for the invitation. It is really nice to be able to be part of this great moment of collective thinking and thought. And also big bravo to Aine Sullivan for what she just said, and also the she's testifying also of the situation. So I would like to speak after her because many things already have been told, and also we could underline some of those topics or enlarge maybe the reflection, because to get to the point and recommendation which just have been presented, we also have to enlarge the vision maybe, because of course gender inequality is not only a problem in high music education, but in the whole society, and it is a systemic problem. So to get some points, we should enlarge our vision and try to act at every step we can. So first of all, I would like to say that there is one statistic which was very meaningful for me as a professional of music, as a concert organizer, is that in 2019, the French National Center for Music published some statistics. Well, the statistics are from 2019. They published it in 2021. And they said that in France, in pop music, there is only 40% of musicians on festival stages who are women, and around 20% in classical music. But if you get the statistics, they base those statistics on the statistics they received from Conservatoire National Supérieur de Paris, Paris National Conservatory, and from Lyon, Bayonne. So the two biggest and highest conservatories. And they took the statistics, how many women were studying there, and how many women the year after, the 2 years after, were on stage. When they look at it for men, there were quite no problem, nothing relevant, more or less, all those students were on stage. And it was not at all the case for women, because it was less than the double who are on stage on the 2 years following the end of their high-level studies. So this is quite shocking. Why that? Many people pointed out the lack of representation of women in music, the lack of models of women in music, the lack of opportunities and job opportunities, the lack of money, and also, we mentioned it, sexual and power abuses. So let's start with the first point, which was in the recommendation of PRIhME, how to get gender balance in conservatories and high school of music. Two things about recruitment of all teachers and staff. Why no female apply? Because in France, it is a big problem. Even when you have a job offer, which is open to male and female, well, men and women, no women apply, or very few women apply. Why so? You cannot recruit some women if they do not apply. But what? When you look at the job offering, it is written for men. They ask the people to be the best artist ever, the best pedagogical ever, and also the best project producer or promoter ever. I mean, it is 3 jobs in one. And if you are dealing with children or with old people, which is actually the case for many women, I mean, you cannot have those 4 jobs in just one. Being at the top level, it's quite impossible. So many female and women just say, okay, well, I won't apply because this is not my case. I cannot be the best one in all those 4 aspects. So this is a consideration which is still in our mind this year, even this year, when we have job opportunities in jazz and other aesthetics also, and we just do not apply because those job offerings are not written for us. So if you want women to apply, please take them in your thoughts when you write the job offer. As for recruitment of students, if you want to have women and men equal in the conservatory, then some musicologists are working on that, like Hyacinthe Ravet in France. Then you should define objective rules for auditions, which means that the recruitment process must ensure anonymity, for example, by using a screen, carpeted floors, and non-reflective ceilings throughout the whole selection process, not just one part of it, but the whole till the very end. If not, at the end, there is a discrimination and male are quite winning more than women, the most important posts, let's say. Also, it's important to encourage women to go towards other instruments. That has been said just before. Maybe it's to think about a specific scholarships, maybe. Female singers represent nearly 70% of female musicians, and the instrument you play is determined at an early age, much before the high studies. And women will be pushed to play piano, violin, or harp more than drums or trumpet, for example. Talent is a myth. This is a very important point. I mean, it seems like something very simple, a simple idea, but it's still an idea that when we are speaking with people from high studies, the conservatories, they're all speaking of talent, where when I am dealing with other director of festival, they're telling me, oh no, I'm not programming women because they have less talent, etc., etc. So talent is a myth. It is very important to work on that idea. Art can emerge because there are talent and work and conditions as a room for one's own money, opportunities, etc. So we should really think about those opportunities. Point number 2 I would like to present is what in French we call matrimoine, who could be translated in English. It would be about woman heritage. But the word in English is history, his story, not her story. So we could also work a lot about her story and teach it in the conservatories. It means review the whole academic program in order to teach female composers as well as men. And in every century, from Sappho in the former Greece of 5 centuries before Christ, to Elisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre, for example, or from Clara Schumann to Kaya Sariao, etc. It is also important to name classes, auditorium, venues with female name everywhere. And it is important to put pictures and portraits of women composers or women artists everywhere in the same place. And also, of course, I'm speaking about women, but it's the same case for gender minorities. Also, and then it is maybe a point that should be worked with a professional. It means not only academies, but also promoter, producers, etc. is how to support females and gender minorities' creativity and creations. It means, for example, define new rules for non-toxic jam sessions, where the main point of the jam session wouldn't be the only technical performance of one man alone on stage at this particular moment. It can be also create a specific award or contest for women or gender minority within the scholarship. Why? Because each time there is a content for everybody, it is really important to see that women usually do not apply, because just in the terms of the content, they feel excluded, or in the vocabulary, it has been said before also. So if you do focus specifically on women and gender minorities, it should be said in the content of the announcement, if you want them to apply. And also adopt gender criteria in some project. Every kind of project can be defined through gender criteria. And there is an important point about never forgetting about intersectionality. If you are a woman or from a gender minority, and if you are Black and poor, I mean, you have 3 times the possibility to be just out of everything. So each time there is a job offering or contest or award or whatever, we should think about intersectionality mixed with gender also in the content and the words we use. Third point, of course, everybody since the Me Too movement is speaking about violence, sexual abuse and harassment, sexual violences. It is a point that has been well defined just before. I would like just to say that sexual abuse and harassment or violence is a crime or an offense and is punished by law. Many of us just do not know the law about those points, and it can be very easy to start by training everybody, explaining the law on those points. Yes, it's important to create all ways and means to secure women and gender minorities, like safer space, discussion groups, academic reference and information regarding policies and support systems. It has been said just before. It is very important to protect the victim or protect the person who dare talk. This is a very important point because till this year, we are meeting a lot of young people explaining us in confidence, apart from the, let's say, the daily life, what kind of problem or harassment are meeting with this teacher or in this university or academy of music, and they do not dare to talk because some of them did dare. And the institution said that first it was more important to protect the institution than to protect maybe a speech that is so difficult to test and to know if it is true or not. So this is one very difficult point because it seems easy, but it's not at all easy to speak and to talk and to dare talk about what is happening when we are dealing with sexual harassment or violence. And also create bridges with outside institutions helping with those issues. It's important that music academies do not stay all together between themselves on those so hard points like sexual abuse and violence. And also it can help a lot the victim to go away, to speak to someone who is outside, who steps outside of the institutions. Last point, but not such an easy point, is it is very important that school, academy and conservatories stay connected to the evolutions of society. So of course it is easy to say and difficult to do. Why so? Because in many times we just don't know if the training has an objective or of training the best students or training the most innovative students. So the best students will probably go towards classical music and aesthetics, and the most innovative probably go through pop music, hip hop, funk, soul, jazz, etc. But the thing is that those aesthetics are put in front, like on the contrary, which is not. But then to get a job and to have the opportunity of a job is another point of view. It's not only art for art. And for example, to be an innovator in this society as an artist, supposed to be very self-confident, to be empowered, to have networks. And to have networks, it's suppose it's all what we mean by the word inclusion. Network is inclusion. So if we're in a system which is exclusive, of course we're not inclusive, and it means that most of the people inside, like women or gender minority, won't have the network after they got the diploma, and so this is why they are not on stage after that. So network and inclusion means mixity, diversity, and able to think or create with a mix of aesthetical and artistic approaches. And it means business, of course. Another thing is that to stay connected to the evolutions of society, of course, is to be able to think about and deal with gender identity. It has been said before, gender identity being queer, trans, homosexual or not. It's also the possibility to think about intersectionality and to take into account during the scholarships. And it means that we should accept, and also we should consider that we are all different, and we also have specific needs, like empowerment. A lot of women need to be much more empowered, feel legitimate to speak, to create, to propose their own view. They need trust and self-confidence, and they are not at the same level of trust and self-confidence than men when they arrive in the studies and when they finish the studies. So maybe we can deal with that also specifically in the scholarship. Maybe it's to create specific models in non-mixity or in mixity, why not? And the possibility to express in the art without being judged. And also, last point, it is very important to teach music business. This is really a problem in France. We do not teach enough music business. They're quite strong with that in the United States. And what does it mean? It means that as women, when they are got the diploma, they have quite no networks or no other women calling them to offer them a job. So what happens? They are not on stage anymore. So what happens? They will probably have to be their own employer and create their own business, their own band, their own everything, in order to be able to get job and an economic situation. So if they have to be entrepreneur, and if nobody teach them before how to do that, of course they are not able to do it afterwards, and then they will just disappear and never go on stage. So it is very important to teach environment of music, production, booking, how to be an entrepreneur, etc. So thank you very much. I hope it was not too long.
Thank you very much, Severin also, and Anne also, both of you very much. Very important points you made, I think. Also, we had a video in the background, so to say, which we cannot watch now because of the schedule, because of the time plan. But I just want say also thank you to Susanne van Els for her contribution in the chat. Maybe there are many more questions which we can discuss in the end of this whole event. And just to let you know, there is a video on YouTube. It's called BBC News, Rape and Abuse, the Music Industry's Dark Side. So I think you also can find that all on your own and look at that, because it's about 14 minutes to watch. And now, thank you very much for your presentations again. And we will go on to our third section today, and to my colleague Mojca Piskor.
Thank you, Christa, and good day to everyone. My role today is to introduce you to both our guest speakers for the third section that covers the third assembly of the PRIhME project, and also to guide you through some of the ideas that we had as a motivating impulse in thinking of this third assembly. My name is Mojca Piskor. I'm an ethnomusicologist working at the Academy of Music University of Zagreb. I'm also the member of Editorial Board of PRIhME and Steering Committee of the project. I will be joined today with two guest speakers. First, Markku Kaikkonen, who is, I assume for many people who are here with us today, a very well-known musician, music teacher, and one of the founders of the Finnish Special Music Center Resonari, which is a prominent and internationally networked developer and promoter of music education with diverse learners. And our second speaker today will be Aretz Labrador, student of Musikene Higher School of Music of the Basque Country, Spain, and also a participant of the stakeholders assemblies of the PRIhME project, who was kind enough to accept our invitation to present his reflections on the participation in the PRIhME project, as well as the final recommendations of the third assembly. Aretz, unfortunately, was not able to join us today in real time, but he sent a recording of his reflections that we will play by the end of this session. Let me just give you some brief information about the third assembly, which was held at the Musikene in San Sebastian, Spain in June 2022. It was a very special assembly because this was the first in-person assembly, which proved important in many ways and was reflected among other things in the intensity of interpersonal relationships of different stakeholders that have been for two assemblies meeting only online. This was the first time for them to really meet in person. And also this very much influenced the productiveness of discussions and even the final outcomes of the third assembly. For us, this was also the first time that assembly was really and truly taking place in an environment and collaborative space that we imagined and wished for when writing the application of the PRIhME project. The pandemic of COVID-19 that affected our project in myriad ways also brought to the surface many of the inequalities and complex power relations inherent in higher music education that we felt the need to address through the PRIhME project, and issues related to the patterns of inclusion based on socio-economic background and disabilities, which was the topic of the third assembly, are just one of them. The two overarching questions of the third assemblies were formulated as this: how does a student's socioeconomic and geographical background, as well as special needs, affect their access to and experience of conservatories? And the second question, how can we raise awareness to exclusion and inclusion practices based on socioeconomic background, race, and disabilities within higher music education institutions? And what steps need to be taken to make our institutions move away from tokenism to being more inclusive? The expert paper that was used as a basis for the third assembly was written and presented at the assembly by Sam Du Bois and offered insight into the impact of mostly socioeconomic background on experiences of studying and the institutional culture of contemporary higher music educations. This, in a sense, gave a stronger emphasis on the topic of class, which was then also maybe more accommodated within the brief that we prepared for the assembly. I'm therefore really happy, and I think we are really privileged to have Markku Kaikkonen from Finland as our guest speaker in this session, because he is one of the internationally recognized experts in the field that helps us understand the complex issues of access and inclusion within higher music education, as Rosemary Garland Thompson says and frames it, all of human variations that we often think of disabilities. I will use the opportunity to thank Markku for accepting our invitation to participate in today's event. And Markku, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the kind words. And greetings from Helsinki, Finland, and greetings from Music Center Resonari, where I work as a director. And of course, thank you for the invitation, and congratulations to all who have been involved in the project. Really interesting and important. There are many connections to the work we do in in our center, and where we are thinking about safe and equal possibilities to learn and join music learning. I would like to share some of those thoughts with you. So something about the background. Resonari is an expertise and innovation center of special music education and inclusive music education. In Resonari, we produce material, we organize courses and continuing education, and we keep up a network for professional association, polytechnics, and universities in Finland and abroad. We have also ongoing project in cooperation, for example, with University of the Arts Sibelius Academy in Helsinki and Helsinki University. But anyway, we always say the heart, the most important thing for us is our music institute, Resonari Music Institute. So actually we are going back to the practices. So everything is coming from these teaching practices. At this moment, close to 300 pupils or students of all ages are enrolled in Resonari Music Institute. Resonari follows the Finnish national curriculum for the music schools and music institutes, and in that way it has so-called official status among all other music schools in Finland. But what makes our work maybe a little bit different if comparing other institutes is all of our pupils or students need special support in learning. Many backgrounds like maybe motoric problems or problems with understanding, for some maybe difficulties to concentrate, or difficulties to be in a group, or if having social events. Although the learning goals and capabilities of the students are different, each student is taught based on a goal-oriented individual teaching plan. So it's goal-oriented teaching. We are really happy. It has not been in this way always, if thinking the history of a music school system in Finland, but nowadays, if thinking National Board of Education gives guidelines for curriculums, and this way of thinking has changed from the past, and nowadays it's possible to make individual curriculum or teaching plan for each student. So this means music schools and institutes are able to open the doors to all learners. So it's fantastic. It is written in this national curriculum nowadays. But now we are coming to this maybe the most interesting question for the teacher, and it's somehow like a fundamental question for us, and it is how to make music and learning music possible for all. So after all, in the focus is pedagogy. How to find the best pedagogical solutions for each student or pupil. Okay, of course we need different kind of pedagogical tools, development work in this area, new approaches. We need material, teacher training, continuing or further education, resources, of course. But also sometimes changes in attitudes, not only in the society in generally when thinking about the accessibility, but also if thinking attitudes in music institutes or schools, and finally attitudes in teacher level. So it is, after all, it's coming to me how I am thinking. Are we ready to open the doors for all learners? And then do we respect everyone as a musician? Do we trust the potential of learning in every student? So these are really important starting point, and especially thinking this kind of attitude, level of attitudes. So in Finland, positive change has started to happen, and like I told, more and more curriculums and guidelines have started to be ready to face students' individual needs. In this way, it has started to be more equality and democracy in learning, and as a result, also, okay, we can say whole cultural field have started to be more equal. Musicians from different background have started to perform together in equal way. So we can say whole cultural field have started to vibrate a little bit differently in the positive way. Those are good changes in the whole society, I think. In Resonari, we have worked now almost 30 years, and if thinking once again this practice, and if thinking our students, so for some learning is really slow or slower if comparing many other music institutes. But what is the most important, it is learning is happening, even sometimes it's a little bit slower. And it's possible if and when we just give time, and when we are ready to make individual curriculums and individual teaching plans. Our students, they need support in learning, but as a result, it has been a little surprise also for us how many of our students have found music and culture also as a profession. I guess and feel I do not have exact numbers about this, but I believe it is the almost same % of our students than in many other music institutes in Finland, if thinking how many will continue to professional level in culture or music fields. And it's interesting because it is telling so this learning process and somehow the result, there are same kind of results if you just open the doors for all. So, of course, most of our musicians, they start to be happy players or happy visitors at concerts, or maybe some other effects or benefits from music it has been. But then it's great to notice there are also people who have found music as the profession as well. For example, a band called Pertti Kurikan Nimipäivät, 4 musicians, we've intellectual and developmental disabilities. These musicians, they were interested about music, but not having any formal education before. This means no understanding about playing together and, for example, about the technique, how to play. And when these musicians came to Resonari, so during studies they had many-sided music education, rhythm groups, keyboard groups, also playing Beethoven and beside the rhythm music, learning by ear, but also information reading, in this case using figure notes, group playing and band technique. And finally, these four musicians, they started to make songs by themselves, and they formed their own band, and they started to play punk music. So, finally, they were presenting Finland in Eurovision Song Contest in 2015. So these musicians, we can say they have been in the marginal, but now with the help of the learning, so suddenly they were in the center of the society. So somehow invisible became visible when we opened the doors for all learners. So it's fantastic to notice this kind of examples, and I'm happy I have seen many this kind of case stories more. I believe we will have a happy future if we take care about democracy in learning, democracy in musicianship, and also democracy in teaching. Finally, all these positive effects and meanings what you get from learning music, they will happen actually automatically if we just open the doors for all learners. So our task is to take care everyone has possibility to start studies in music. The right to learn belongs to everyone, and the music, yes, it should be, must be a fundamental right for all. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. And I think that devoted and long-term work of Resonari, but also different kinds of collaborations that you have with music, so with higher music education institutions in Finland have really changed the landscape of inclusion of higher music education institutions as well, and shown that pedagogical knowledge and support networks and commitment to real inclusion is really beneficial for all the people inhabiting our institutions. Thank you once again for your reflections. Now I will ask Ashkan to play a video with the reflections of Aritz Labrador, and allow him to present the ways that the stakeholders working in the assemblies of PRIhME have come up with some recommendations connected to the questions of inclusion of people of different socioeconomic backgrounds and special needs or disabilities. I would also just want to tell you that the audio quality of the recording is not as good. So if it might be good for you to turn up the volume on your computers or mobile phones through which you are.
Hello everyone, my name is Aritz Labrador. I am a student at PRIhME, and I'm really sorry that I cannot be today joining you for this Multiplier event that will finalize in a way our work with the PRIhME project, and that will in a way be the last chance to talk about these recommendations and all the products that we have constructed, we have built towards the years and these last 2 years. I just wanted to share quickly my experience and my feelings when talking about this project and when participating in this project. I've been involved for a couple of years when PRIhME started, and my center, my school, decided that I could be a representative for this project. I was really happy to take a step on and to actually take the opportunity to be part of this team. I was involved for more than 9 years in the European Youth Parliament, and I learned a lot of things about things that we've been discussing, and I was really I was eager to bring these things, these discussions and these ideas into music education, into higher music education. And I was very happy to be part of this project. I learned so many things, especially getting to know the reality of different countries. That was really useful. I was really surprised to see a very diverse group of people, bunch of people that were discussing about the same thing and actually looking for solutions for the same problems, no? Even though it's something wide and the situation changes from country to country, I think we managed to find common ground, not only in terms of solutions but also in problematics. I think we could find that we are not that different in the end, and that we could work together for in order to find new solutions as we were looking for that. And second thing I was really surprised with, and I learned a lot about, is that power relations are everywhere, and power relations are not just a simple description of relationship between teacher and student, which is the most obvious power relation symbol or image that comes to your mind when you think about this term. But in the opposite side, I think it's further. No, we saw it in every conference that it goes beyond. It's not just about it, but for example, socio-economic backgrounds and disabilities also form, in a way, a power relation. So that's the difference between two agents, and of course there's a dependence. And I like that a lot. I found power relations now everywhere, and I'm very happy that my school, actually Multiplier, started already to figure out what things can be done. And I personally think I changed my mind a lot as well with my relationships with my teachers and with my colleagues and with the center as well, where I study, with the school. So that's very cool that we are now already implementing changes, and that's very important because it makes us active citizens in a way, active students, active workers, active teachers, active administration, members of the administration. So active people, active citizens, wanting to change our surroundings in order to build something better. No, that's very important, I think. Today I'm here also to talk about the third assembly, the Assembly on Socio-Economic Background and Disabilities, and to briefly express or represent or explain what 5 conclusions we reached and what 5 recommendations we are trying to give for the rest of the community, for the rest of the schools that can actually now read, go through and find ideas in order to implement and make a better environment, not only in my school or in the schools that are involved in PRIhME, but farther beyond. Socioeconomic background and disability is something that it's complex to explain, and sometimes we, at least before participating in PRIhME, I wouldn't really relate it to power relations at all. But there is actually power relations behind this, and I think it's very important that we discussed about it and that we looked about it. I personally was one of these people who who didn't have enough resources to go to a private university, for example. I've been very happy in Musikene for now 6 years, studying 2 degrees. I'm graduated already from music interpretation with an instrument from the Basque Country, a folklore instrument, and now I'm a orchestra conducting student that will finalize my studies next year. So I was very happy to be part of Musikene as a public kind of subsidized school. In terms of resources, I mean financial resources and my background. I'm gonna be honest, both of my parents are now unemployed, and it's been hard times. I've been working for my whole student life, so I feel really identified with these recommendations, and I'm very happy that we could discuss about this. Actually, we discussed about this in a very important moment in my life. So I would be very happy now to explain and introduce you to these different conclusions and recommendations. First one is we recommend development of safe spaces for students with disabilities to speak openly with professors and with the center, with staff in general. And we recommend also to have trainings for teachers, students, and staff to assist these students and to find how to improve our schools, our environments, in order for everyone to have accessibility and ensure equal access for everyone. No, that's very important. I think we sometimes are not aware of the potential barriers and that the center can have, that the students, the school can have, the university can have. And I think it's very important that we think about it, we reflect about it. Of course, every center, every school is completely different and may have different barriers. But I think in our discussions we found that there are barriers. Barriers exist in every center. It's something widely common. So having a space where we can analyze what kind of barriers we can have in our schools, and trying to find different approaches. First of all, in order to solve this problem, so to find these barriers and to improve them, so get rid of them basically, but also how to approach the students that have disabilities or have problematics or problems to access our institutions or our studies in general. I think both are really important. As an example, in our paper, we can see that we are talking about, for example, elevators not being existent in several centers because of their historical background and so forth. I think there are more issues than just an elevator, of course. An elevator is a very clear symbol of what a problem of this kind can be. But I'm sure there are so many barriers that we have to try to improve. And the second part of this argument is also the personal assistant to the people who are affected by this. Second one is we recommend higher music education institutions to employ or consult with a trainer diversity disability officers. So this comes hand in hand with the first recommendation, and it's just not that we do it by ourselves, but there are actually consultant offices for diversity trainings, disability trainings and stuff. So qualified people and professional people who can help us to make this happen. And I think that is very important, that we don't just do it by ourselves in a way that can be useful, but that we can also have a professional advice from it. That's very important. Third one comes, we urge all the institutions to develop sustainable forms of financial support for students in need. We talked about my own situation, for example, so there can be students with financial situation problems, also physical or mental health issues, disabilities, etc. I think we need to find structures that are solid for covering this kind of problematics. So I'm talking about having a proper budget, a proper annual budget where these things are included, because diversity is important. So And if we don't have accessibility, we don't have diversity. This goes hand in hand. I think it's very important to understand this. So when we have accessibility for everyone, we have a diverse collective studying, working, or whatever in our institutions. So we have to work on that very much. And yeah, and taking it from different angles and different perspectives, because it's not just one thing. Diversity means diversity, so different people from different backgrounds, with different characteristics, with different feelings, with different ideas, with different differentiations can work together, can study together, and that's enriching. And that's not only for ethical reasons and artistic reasons, but it's also enriching for everyone, and that's very important. And of course, this brings diversity to our students, to our teachers groups as a collective, and also to the whole educational community in every institution. That's very important, I think. Fourth, we recommend accommodating staff, prospective and current students with disabilities or other physical or mental health issues with individualized support, as well as continued professional development and training with a dedicated annual budget. A little bit related with the last things, but a little bit more focus, I would say, on the budget. So a dedicated annual budget, that is very important, that our institutions, when they do their own budget, their yearly budget, this has to be included, and these kind of things have to be included. In the last recommendation, I forgot to say a little bit, it doesn't have to be like when we are helping, for example, financial problem students. What I found personally, sometimes it's not just having a financial support, so a scholarship or something like that, but it can be finding several discounts, or in our discounts in the services that are offered in the schools, or can be also finding a special curricula to try or to support students who work and study at the same time, for example. So initiatives don't have to be only budget-wise. But recommendation number 4 insists that also having a budget is very important, and especially I would say individualized support. So not only that we think collectively and massively as an institution, but we also find a path and a way and a supporting system, something systematic and not only casual when something happens, but something systematic, a protocol or something, for individualized support. So when somebody has a problem, that this can be approached and resolved individually, not only with so taking into account that every case can be different. And last but not least, this is a minority report, so not the whole assembly were really in favor of adding this, but as it had a kind of significant supporting procedures, supporting percentage, it was included there. And it says, we recommend private higher musical education institutions to provide students that demonstrate clear financial needs discounts for retaking a course if their students fail to pass the final exams in order to avoid study dropouts. I think this recommendation can be a little bit tricky when talking about not only financial support because there are financial problems or people who are coming from delicate financial backgrounds, but it's also related to the efficiency or to the results that these people can offer. Sometimes can be a cause of the financial situation, but sometimes can or doesn't have to be. So I understand that it was a little bit discussed, this argument, if it had to be added or not. But yeah, I see it as a side comment, at least as a 5th point here. I think it's very important to also talk about it. And okay, that's my intervention. I'm sorry if I was a little bit long. I also wanted to share a little bit my experience and my personal feelings about this specific content, or this specific assembly content. I'm hoping that you're having fun and you're having lots of learningful points today in this this multiplier event. I might be joining in the last minutes, but I'm sorry that I cannot be here today because I have a concert and it's summer and it's so many concerts and so many, yeah, it's high season now, so I'm so sorry that I cannot be there. I hope that we see each other soon and that you have a very fruitful discussions today. See you.
Okay, before we finished, and we are already a little bit late, I just wanted to also add one more thing on the table. One of the topics that is very important in all intersectional discussions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also one topic that often opens difficult and uncomfortable questions and conversations are the issues of race and racism, issues that, according to some, are something that is hidden in a plain sight within higher music education institutions. But these are also issues that are often remain somehow unaddressed. And this was also partly mirrored in the discussions within the third assembly. We wanted to finish this session with a short video. We will not have time, but I will ask Ashken to just put the link into the chat. And this video was intended as a sort of a reminder of all of the brave discussions that are going on and need to continue in the future when talking about power relations in higher music education, and that deal with the issues of systematic racism and issues of different constructions of race in music education. This is a video of a poem written by Nate Holder that is called "If I Were a Racist: A Reflection on Music Education in 2020." So I recommend that you look at it at some point. I thank you for the attention. If you have any questions, you can add them to our chat, and we will get back to them at the end of today's event. And I will now give words to Karin Johansson of the Malmö Academy of Music, who will introduce the last assembly of PRIhME project.
Thank you very much, Mojca. Kjell Husbond, who is the speaker in this session, he will have to leave at 16:30. So I will now give the word to him immediately and then do my own introduction afterwards. So we take it in the reverse order. So please, Kjell, if you are there, can you enter?
Hello, I hope you can hear me. I'm sitting in a car on my way to Germany. But I'm not driving right now, though. But very nice to see all of you. I feel a little bit like arriving late for the party, because it seems like so much good stuff has been going on in this project and also today. And it has been a pleasure to read through a lot of the materials and get inspired. And it's also very close to my heart to work on these issues. And it was quite emotional to hear the previous speaker talk about, well, there are many ways to enter into this field of high music education with many different backgrounds. My name is Kjell Husbond. I'm the acting principal of the Royal Academy of Music in Aarhus in Denmark. And I was hoping I could show you just 4 small PowerPoints. So if you allow me to share, am I able to?
Is the green button there? Share screen.
Yes. It's just weird. I can't find the. Doesn't come up. For some reason. I'm not allowed to share that. Well, anyway, I'll just talk through. I have sort of 3 things to bring into the table here. One is about a project I've been involved in called the Genus project. Maybe some of you were involved, and I'm just going to say a few words about that. And then I will say a little bit about the concept of artistic citizenship and how that can be used in empowering institutions. And finally, and I guess that is why I was asked to talk a bit here, was to come with a few predictions about the future, which is always really difficult. But I noticed in some of the material that you encourage utopian thinking. So I was going to end on a high note and come up with a few utopian ideas. But first of all, this Genus project, which has been running for 3-4 years in the Nordic countries, in Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland, has been focusing on the goal of the project has been to raise the awareness of gender and equality perspectives in music education. Actually, we started out focusing on gender imbalances in especially jazz and pop education. And as you all aware, we have a lack of non-male instrumentalists in the jazz pop field, and maybe also a bit of a lack of male singers in the area. So that was the starting point to find out how can we do something about that. And we have had a series of meetings and discussions and online material going on, and it was pretty clear that we could not stick to that topic alone. We also had to move into the area of power imbalances and diversity in a more general perspective. So the reason why I bring it up here is that if you are interested in seeing the results, you can go to the webpage of the project. I think it's also mentioned somewhere in the PRIhME material. Yes, thank you, Lucy. There's 2 kinds of what I would say is the most interesting. There's a toolbox for different ways of working with diversity and inclusion and how to make gender balances better. And it goes on different levels, flying levels, you could say. There's something about the structure of our organizations, which you have been talking a lot about that, I'm sure. There's something about focusing on the mental health aspects. Another headline is teacher qualifications. How do we work with the teacher qualifications? And of course, the content of the education. And this is not new to any of you. I'm sure you have been going through this. But there's also something about the language that we use in our daily lives, how to update it to a more modern language and not offensive language. A lot about auditions. How do we work with this quite old-fashioned way of entrance examinations in our sector? How do we work with role models, and finally about learning environments? So you will find a lot of inspiration if you go through this toolbox. There's also a little bit of a checklist for gender balances that you can use as for instance, a manager of an institution. It's pretty close to what has been going on in the PRIhME project, and I'm really happy to see that the scope of the projects in general is becoming bigger. So a few words about the concept of artistic citizenship. To me, I know can be a quite old discussion for some of you, but it is about opening up our institutions to a situation where you can actually influence your surroundings, that you take a proactive stand and you insist that your higher music education can actually be an important player in developing our welfare societies. And that goes from the highest level of strategic thinking and management, but it also goes down to each individual teacher and student, how to find your own way of maneuvering in this field of artistic citizenship. In Denmark, in Aarhus, we have been working with sort of a triangle. That's what I want to show you, but now I'll just do it here, where there are three different aspects that is really important when you work with artistic citizenship. And one is, of course, to keep on insisting on the artistic quality. We don't want to make bad art. We want to make really good art and insist on that. But at the same time, working with two other corners. One is about a market orientation, that we should insist that our graduates, they can make a living of what they're doing. And at the same time, insisting of relevance to the society. So the key words here are co-creation, working with the market, working with the civil society, putting art on top of it, and insisting that in this triangle you can actually find solutions to make artistic citizen projects. Okay, finally I'll move on to the future ideas, and I was reflecting a little bit about who am I to talk about the future of higher music education. But I got a bit inspired by this utopian thinking idea. And I Googled a bit and I stumbled over a concept that is called human-centered education. And I'm sure some of you have been working with that. It's not like teacher-centered or student-centered learning education that we have been working with for many years, the two paradigms, but it's like going to a new level, a shift of paradigm to a human-centered education situation. And some of the characteristics here is also what I see in the material of PRIhME, that there's a very high level of sensitivity towards the individual. As an institution, you have to be aware that we're working with people and not systems. And this might sound very simple and easy, but I think this is something that we have to keep on investigating in the future. And another key word is empowerment, that everything we do in the systems or in the management cycles should be focusing on empowerment to individuals. And this goes hand in hand with what I sometimes call peer-to-peer learning infrastructure, that we are all constructive feedback experts, or we should be. So when we talk together, we should really be sensitive. We should be really good at leaving the floor to the peers, student to student, very often, but it can also be colleague to colleague. And this leads up to a situation where we put artistic interventions in the center. When I talked about artistic citizenship, but also artistic interventions as a part of this new and better artistic citizenship. You could call it 3.0 artistic citizenship institutions, where there is a global responsibility, and you would experience global responsible entrepreneurship classes in your curriculum. And you, in this ideal situation, you would have an institution that would have a perfect balance between the artistic aesthetic, the top of the triangle I was showing, and the societal mission. So you would really have an ideal institution taking care of the individual, being responsible for the society, and also on a larger global scale, on the global development, so to speak. Well, this was a lot of guessing and talking about the future. I would stop here and think if you have some questions or anything, I will hang on for another 5 minutes.
I think we need to continue in order to be able to fit in all the program. Thank you very much, Kel, for your inspiring and important viewpoints. And maybe people can get back later with questions
Sure.
to you. Okay, thank you very much. I will now continue with the introductory text part that I will do before we go to the student perspectives. And you don't need to worry because my text will take 5 minutes, including the short video. So my name is Karin Johansson, and I'm a professor at the Malmö Academy of Music, where I was also recently the principal. Our academy belongs to Lund University, where I'm now the Deputy Dean for Research at the Faculty of Fine and Performing Arts. And Malmö Academy of Music has been part of the PRIhME project throughout, and I have been a member of the steering committee. The challenges presented to today's students, teachers, and leaders in music are great. And as we have seen, PRIhME has given invaluable perspectives on the interaction between musical practice, the music profession, and research in this area, and on the future development of higher music education. The topic of Assembly 4 was artistic standards, with a specific focus also on the important utopian aspects that Kjell also mentioned, that have been present in PRIhME. As we will see shortly, the recommendations produced in the Assembly concern the assessment of music making and questions of mandate and power when evaluating quality inside the institutions. I will start with a short point of view on the context for the conservatoire of the future, which I think will be characterized above all by what you can call change in unknown ways. I would like to highlight one aspect of the concept standards that is part of musicians' tacit knowledge, but maybe not always obvious to others. Consider the following reflection on assessing musical quality in this short video clip, which Ashken will start.
Musicians are held to an almost impossibly high standard. In fact, we typically expect nothing less than perfection from musicians. In most schools in the United States, something like a 90% average gets you a grade in the A range. That means you can get 10% of the answers wrong on an exam, or not turn in 10% of your homework, assuming the other homework is perfect, and still be considered a top performer. That doesn't seem to work in music. You're about to hear a MIDI realization, which is sort of like a computer simulation from an excerpt of Michael Jackson's Billie Jean. Pay close attention, because in a moment, some of those notes are about to change. Believe it or not, that excerpt had over 600 notes in it. In keeping with our school standards, I should be able to miss about 60 of those notes, or 10%, and still be considered a top performer. Here's what the 90% version of Billie Jean might sound like. If you're not a musician, imagine all of the hard work that goes into an art form that's held to a standard of perfection. If you think about that the next time you go to a concert, you might find yourself appreciating the art form even more.
The extraordinary high and not always articulated standards required of musicians relate to how music as an art form is also essentially a craft, building on skills that are learned, practiced, and then judged in examinations and on the public music arena. The heart and soul and utmost aim of higher music education is the music making on the public music arena, and usually the artistic standards there correspond to those in the education. But this arena changes in unknown ways. Some traditional standards disappear, some transform, and new ones appear. 10 years ago, I wrote an article called Experts, Entrepreneurs, and Competence Nomads, the Skills Paradox in Higher Music Education. There, I pointed to the dynamics between old basic skills and new basic skills. That is, all the old basic skills remain, while new ones, which are often very time-consuming, are constantly added. Who has the power to decide which skills should be dropped and which new ones should be added, and who evaluates the quality of them? This dynamic is just one example of future challenges. How can the conservatoire of the future, maybe with an utopian perspective, articulate and work with them? The PRIhME project has provided a unique platform for development of higher music education, and I look forward to a future with many new developments in this area. Callum will now return and read out the resolutions of Assembly 4. After that, we will watch the video where Juan Camilo Vázquez Montoya, who is a student at the St. Louis College of Music in Rome, gives his personal views on the 4th Assembly. And also here, you might need to raise the volume for the video. Okay, Callum, please.
Hi, folks. I'm back just to read the resolutions from Assembly number 4. There are 5 main points that we made in these recommendations, but also 2 minority reports. So the first is we recommend that institutions introduce and implement a clear system of assessment criteria made available to students, teachers, and examiners. The second point is we recommend that each institution implement a systematic examination approach with documented feedback feed-forward delivered in a balanced and constructive way. The third point is we suggest establishing an institutional forum dedicated to assessment in all its aspects. The forum's work should be transparent and disseminated throughout the institution. The fourth point is we recommend where external examiners are appointed, they be suitably qualified with a proven track record in education as well as performance. The fifth and last main point is we recommend the introduction of performance classes at all institutions to enable cross-faculty feedback from both tutors and students. Then we have 2 minority reports. So these were both included just to represent the views of a minority, but we still felt it was important to include. The first minority report is we urge higher music education institutions to include a member of the student body in joining examination juries to observe and monitor the process, especially for entrance exams. This recommendation received 50% or support from 50% of the participants and 50% against. So you can imagine that was a very interesting discussion. The last minority report is we urge higher music education institutions to facilitate students performing their final recital for a professor other than their own prior to the final examination taking place. And that's me finished now. I'll hand over to the video with Juan Camilo.
Karin, shall I play now the video? Are we waiting for the video?
I didn't understand that I was going to play the video.
No, I will play if it's
yes, you
right
will play.
time. Okay,
yes.
Sure. Yes.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Juan Vázquez, and as some of you may already know, I'm a student at St. Louis College of Music. I'm following the Bachelor on Songwriting and Music Production. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to be with you today, but my summer schedule has been crazy. But I'm really happy I was given the chance to do this video so I can give my point of view over the resolutions of the Assembly Court. And I can assure you it wasn't an easy task. When it comes to a clear and fair assessment criteria and evaluation process, it can be very hard to find a general point of view. As we experienced during the assembly board, like there were so many opinions and points of view and ideas that it was really hard to get a general thought. But I'm really proud of the work we got to do and the things that we established, because it was very helpful and so deeply well thought. We talked about so many important things, like, as I told you before, clear assessment criteria, balanced and constructive ways to receive and give feedback, institutional forums, so like students, staff members, and teachers could have a place to get the chance to see how the improvement is going without the sensation of being evaluated. And we came out with really important questions like, what does it mean to be evaluated and judged? What are the skills that we need to acquire? And what does it mean to acquire knowledge and skills? What does it mean to pass or fail? Super important questions when it comes to the construction of a really good and constructive environment in college. The first thing I wanted to do in this video was to give my point of view over this topic of being evaluated, not only regarding myself, but my colleagues, my friends, and all the guys and students that I had the chance to meet from the Erasmus programs, and students that have come to St. Louis from other countries outside the Erasmus programs, such as myself. I'm from Colombia. I came all the way to Italy to study here. When it comes to college, it feels like a huge part of it is doing great with every subject. Get the better grade. Get evaluated in the best possible way. To show your teachers, the jury, and your staff that you are actually worth material and that you're worth it, that you are doing the best and you are meant to belong to the world that you choose to be part of. And it could be very tiring, because when it comes to music, I think it's slightly harder than that. Because your skills and your educational growth comes along to a really specific and deep human growth. When you're performing, when you're arranging, when you're playing, when you're composing, when you're singing, when you're writing, you need to show to the world that is looking at you that you have a human side that is really ready to be exposed, that you know yourself enough to be able to share that with the people. But it's not only about how good you are at taking notes and creating new progressions, or how good you can read or run. You need to be able to connect with people. And when it comes to the evaluation, you feel like the jury in front of you, the staff members also, when it comes to the chance to perform, like in any concert, and you are carrying the title of your college, that people are going to judge you not only because how good you are, but they are going to see the human being that you're exposing. And it can be very harsh, because like when it comes to my friends and we talk about it, it feels like when we do good, it feels like we are doing the right thing, that we're improving the way we should do, that we may have a space in the job market, that maybe we're going to be the ones that are going to have the possibility to have like a real steady job and be called for concerts and writing and producing stuff. But when we do not as good, or when we fail, we don't have the feeling that we have a chance to improve, that it was like a ring alarm telling you like, okay, you need to do better at this. But it feels like not being good enough for the things we're doing, that we were not shaped to be there, to follow the things that we want for ourselves. I told once during a meeting of PRIhME that the teacher had really great power in their hands, because we come to you as students for you to give us all the knowledge that you have built and that you have acquired, and just like be ready to receive it and to make the best out of it. And I need to be crystal clear here. Like, when it comes to me, it wasn't really easy to find my place in all this world. It wasn't easy to feel worth it, to feel like I was doing the right thing for myself, and that I was going to find the future that I wanted for myself. That is not about just like singing in every arena or being able to be a really renowned artist, but it's about having a dignified life. But I have the luck to have teachers and staff members that had my back. In a human level, they were able to make me feel that it was not only about getting the best grade, but feeling that what you were doing when you work really hard was the only way to get to a really good life. That is not about being famous, but it's about being steady as a human being. Feeling that what you do is really easy. We are really live in a world that is constantly telling us that we are not going to be good enough, that the career that we picked is not going to lead us anywhere, that finding a job in a steady life is going to be almost impossible, that only 1 in a million gets the chance to be on top of all that, that the only way you can find peace if you like decide and settle that you can work in a kitchen or like looking for a side job, or just like people even telling you that if to study music is a thing that it's really important, you know, that I had people coming at me saying like, but you need college to learn how to sing, college to learn how to write a song. And it can be very heavy on us as human beings and as young human beings. And if I need to tell the truth, I'm very thankful to PRIhME, because it gave us the chance to don't only look at a very specific academic issue, but a human level in all that. When we talk about empowering to empower, when we talk about gender and sexuality, when we talk about equality, when we talk about how we feel when we get evaluated and how to find better ways to do it, it means that we really urge to find a human level to work with. And how are we creating a safe space that is not going to protect us from the world outside, but it's going to prepare us for what we're going to find and how we're going to be ready to face it in the best possible way, without feeling that if something goes wrong, it's because we weren't worth of it. We have the chance to open our eyes and feel like the only goal is not to be evaluated, but to show that we are capable, to be strong and feel like, you know what, if I fail, it's because I need to improve. And what better than feeling that you have also like a lot of spaces in which you need to grow, because that's what life is about. And when it comes to great and good grades, it's like, great, it feels like I'm growing and I'm doing better. And what I got is growing stronger. I'm really thankful to this program, because whenever there's like an intercultural space, you've got the chance to have a wider eye over the things you're doing, because we got the chance to see who we are and what we're doing and what's lacking in the place in which we live. So how the things are doing in another country gives us the possibility to improve and find new resolutions and understand what is not working. I'm very thankful for all this. And I'm very thankful to the fact that we found out that other than academically, we need to work in a very specific and deep human level. I know things are going to be better. It's going to take a while, but now we have a point from which to start building things up. And as a student, I feel reassured because I know my teachers are going to listen, because I know the staff members that are working in college are going to listen because they were students at the time. And they also need like a really safe environment to work in. And as college is about shaping the future, I feel like we need to shape it in the best possible way. Thank you very much to everybody. And thank you for giving me the chance to give my point of view over this important topic.
We say thank you to Juan Camilo, and I now give the word to Deborah.
Thank you very much, Karin. And we're coming close. We're actually 10 minutes only from the end of time. And the good news is I don't think there are any questions, which means there won't be disappointed people, I believe. We only have 10 minutes left. We're going to end on time. And this has been a very, very intensive and exciting 3 hours. We reviewed our 4 stakeholder assemblies where we understood what power is in 1, where we looked at gender and sexual orientation in 2, where we looked at socio-economic disability, race in assembly 3, and where we reflected on artistic standards and focusing really on whose standards and whose assessment in assembly 4. I think it's a valuable opportunity now before we close, not only first of all to thank everyone who participated, but also to give a couple of minutes to the chair of the assembly to give some final reflections, Gretchen Amussen. Before I give the floor to Gretchen, I'd like to thank everybody who participated in today's Multiplier event, notably Lucia di Cecca, who was the driving force behind the preparation, but also all of the members of the steering committee and the working group who were here, the student presenters, the expert presenters, and all of you for coming and listening to us. There were lots more that we could have put in, but thankfully, the PRIhME website and information has all of the videos and all of the materials that we spoke about. I'm sure we'll be sending everyone who registered a follow-up email with the relevant links, because also I can see that Ashkan was putting this into the chat box as we were going. So one final section here, which is to ask Gretchen Amussen, who was the chair of the 4 stakeholder assemblies and who sat and listened, and I'm sure was getting flashbacks and memories of what we went through, to give us some final closing thoughts. Gretchen.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, everybody. It's really been a fascinating afternoon, and my first reaction is to say how incredibly proud I am of the students who represented the project here and who shared really how empowering this project was and how it really changed their thought processes and gave them words to engage in complicated and sensitive topics. And I think that that's really one of the big takeaways from the PRIhME project. I also think that it's so impressive to see exposed one by one the series of recommendations that were made that came out of these assemblies. And really each time they came out of a 2-day process in which information was given and in which people exchanged and asked themselves best case solutions, worst case solutions. And it's been really nice to have the additional feedback from people from different worlds. For example, the Raisonnari with how can we make all learners potential musicians? How can we be in this human-centered approach that Kjeld Osman speaks about. And then taking Anna Bull's next steps comment about the youth voice and the music voice and the learner voice. How can we bring all these voices together? And I think that, that this is very much a start, but it's not an end in itself. And that the answer is that we really just need to keep going. And we need to take these tools and these words that we now share that allow us to confront our prejudices and to say, how can we be more open as institutions? How can we make it so that privilege is not the only way that people access higher music education? And how can we just keep questioning what we do so that we come to a place which is very much one in which each voice matters? I don't think I have much more to say, but I just like to congratulate all the people who made this happen today. And it's been such a great project. And maybe my last word would be to say that deliberative democracy as a process is one that I highly recommend for all of you to consider when you're looking at very complex issues, that by bringing people together and giving them information and allowing them to debate and discuss, creates a level playing field, which is just invaluable. So thank you, Deborah, for inviting me to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Gretchen. Those of you who attend the AEC Congress in The Hague in November will see these resolutions and will see further information on PRIhME. We would hope that the members of the AEC, which number over 300 music education institutions, will adopt these recommendations, and that these standards will be what all institutions that wish to be safer and more supportive learning environments will adopt. Thank you to Ashkan and the team in the AEC office for managing this webinar so magnificently. To all of you, have a wonderful new academic year. Enjoy your weekend, which is coming up quite soon. And I look forward to staying in touch with you and for these issues to be progressed and developed in the future. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.